The name of the course is Utopia Possible? If you were asked to take out a crystal ball, to shuffle a few tarot cards, to roll the dice, or simply predict the future of humanity, what would you see? What would your greatest hopes look like? What would your greatest fears feel like? A school that promotes reading and creative thinking, or a school that bans books and encourages you to think just like everyone else? A government that upholds equality and individuality, or a government that watches and controls your every move? A land inhabited by a peaceful race of humans who no longer toil to eat, or a land inhabited by a violent race of the undead who toil to feed on the living? Will humans be the guardians of the earth, or will Wall-E be the only creature left cleaning up the waste of humanity? Will having too much of what we love, our cell phones, our car, our TV, ruin us? Or will our hate be our undoing? Do you see Eden or the apocalypse? If one were to ask Wells, Huxley, or Orwell to comment on our present time and predict the future, could they even keep up? Welcome to your future. The goal of this course is to examine these hopes, these fears of utopias and dystopias, and understand and appreciate the genre by discussing these and totally other related questions. So we're going to begin with some classics, maybe a little Plato's Republic, maybe a Communist Manifesto, and then we're going to move forward into more contemporary works like Brave New World or 1984 or I Am Legend. We're going to examine The Walking Dead and Hunger Games and a lot of short pieces and film to discuss what's real, what's plausible, and what's possible for humanity, and to have a more evolved awareness of our role. So that would be, is Utopia possible?
We have an exciting new course called Finding Your True North, Finding Yourself in the Modern World. You ever get lost in the middle of a forest and not know where you're going? That's kind of what life is like sometimes. When English teachers get lost, we just pick up a good book, we follow a literary character through, and we find out if that's our way, to find our true north. But the genesis for this course came from the question, what happens when people aren't readers? What happens when people aren't English teachers? Where do they look? So during this course, we're going to look at some literary texts and how some literary characters deal with this question of identity, but we'll also look at some of the more modern and popular and even fun self-help books. Something that you might be encouraged to pick up on your own outside of school. We'll look at how creating art and finding physical adventure and maybe even going inward with meditation and a little bit of mindfulness can help us find our own identity in this really confusing world.
Pinocchio! What are you doing here at the beach? Shouldn't you be at school?
Oh, I skipped school to look for my daddy. He got swallowed by a giant shark and it's all my fault.
Oh no! That's terrible!
Yes, and it's all my fault because I'm a good-for-nothing rebellious scamp. I didn't listen to that talking cricket, I didn't listen to my daddy, and I didn't listen to the blue fairy. So now I'm paying for it.
Oh, don't cry, Pinocchio. I'll help you, but first you have to go to school.
Never, and again, never.
Yourself, Pinocchio, but by this time tomorrow, your dear old daddy is going to be digested by that giant shark.
Don't even say it. Don't even say my daddy's going to be digested. I'll go to school if it'll save my daddy.
Let's go then. Class is about to begin. Fairy tales and fantasy literature.
Sounds awful.
Ha! I assure you, Pinocchio, it is not. In fact, after reading about Beowulf and Grendel's really angry mom, and after reading about kings who don't keep their words, and magic animals that always show up at just the right time, and spells that must be broken before it can all end happily ever after, and after reading about giant green knights swinging razor-sharp axes, and Bilbo and Gollum and Smaug,
Oh my!
we read about you.
Me?
Yes, Pinocchio, you.
I'm in a book? Is my daddy
He
in it?
is.
Oh, tell me how it ends. Does he ever get out of the giant shark? Do I save him? Does he ever forgive me? And what about my patient, beautiful fairy with sky blue hair? Does she forgive me too? Does the cricket know I'm truly sorry?
Well, Pinocchio, you'll have to sign up for the class to find out.
What's it called? What's it called?
Fairy tales and fantasy literature.
The Gothic Horror class is a semester course that explores the concept of the monstrous. Beginning with Mary Shelley's romantic theory in Frankenstein, where the monster is a creation of his family, his parents, his education, his government, and he ultimately winds up being a serial killer, to a Freudian theory present in Dracula, where the idea of the monster is anyone who threatens our civilization at large. From there, we can kind of explore other ideas about serial killers, haunted objects, possession, The Exorcist, anything that would cause us to examine this dark fear of the unknown within ourselves and see how that's present in the outside world. One of the really interesting qualities of this class is that as we're reading this development of Gothic horror in literature, we can also see how this is developed in modern American horror films. So I like to compare Stephen King's Carrie to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I like to look at how Francis Ford Coppola changes some of the elements of Dracula to make it more feminist in theory. It's really interesting to watch bits of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and see how women continue to be objectified, but really to see how this genre as a whole develops, expands, and ultimately explores our fear of the unknown, our fear of the other, and of course our fear of ourselves. So I invite you to take this class. I think I enjoy teaching it. I'm not sure who else will or won't be teaching it, but it's definitely fun and it's a great way to spend senior year.
What is a graphic novel, you may ask? Well, a graphic novel is a text that marries both words and images. This text is Watchmen. It's one of the texts that we'll be reading throughout the year. In addition to Watchmen, we'll be reading graphic novels such as The Arrival, V for Vendetta, and Maus. The graphic novel course is a class that's a traditional English class with a twist. In addition to the words, we also have images to analyze. So if you like comics or if you like artwork, this might be the class for you. And even if you don't, you might want to give it a shot.
The great thing about contemporary literature is that you get the chance to read some authors who are actually still alive, which means reading perspective that was shaped by a world that more closely resembles the world we reside in. That, of course, is not a knock on the classics. I love those works. And the classics are classic for a reason. But in some ways, these offerings are the response to those works. In some cases, contemporary literature is a retelling, or perhaps a revisiting of these conflicts or questions that stay with us. Because for as much as society may have appeared to have changed, there are many elements that remain the same. The work that you examine in contemporary literature is great to experience, not just for the fact that it's new, because that in and of itself is not a reason, but because your academic reading up to this point has hopefully prepared you to understand that the important topics were always important, always continue to be important. The goal is that each generation contributes a verse in that dialogue about these topics. And in contemporary lit, that dialogue continues into the classroom.